Money does not define a person's dignity. Annie Carter. Whitmore's voice carried across the private client lounge of Heritage Crown Bank. You may refuse the transaction, but you have no right to throw away a card bearing my name and treat my skin as an insult. Her voice was clear, measured, and calm. Just as a plainly dressed man in gray athletic pants and a navy sweatshirt stepped through the glass entrance. You still dare to talk back to me? Victoria Langford snapped. Do you want me to call security and have you thrown out? Annie drew a slow breath. Her eyes were wet, but her voice remained clear. This is a place that serves customers. Your own wall promises dignity, trust, and service. Is this how those words are supposed to look? Behind Victoria, brass letters gleamed beneath the lobby lights. Dignity, trust, service. Victoria pointed a finger at Annie's face. A girl who got lucky enough to win a scholarship should be grateful she has an account at all. You belong outside at the public window, not sitting in a private lounge meant for respectable clients. The black card Victoria had taken from Annie lay on the floor between them. One corner rested beneath the toe of Victoria's cream-colored heel. Miss Langford, Annie said, forcing herself to remain calm. I came here through the university's official process to activate a student account connected to my merit scholarship. My identification and documents have already been verified twice. There is no need for a performance, Victoria replied. This is a financial institution, not a stage. Then please follow financial procedure. Scan the code, call the university, or contact your own trust department. What legal basis do you have for confiscating my card and accusing me of forgery? Victoria's mouth curled. My basis is experience. Cards like this are not issued to girls who arrive dressed like you. Clothing and skin color do not determine whether a document is authentic. Do not lecture me about my job. I'm not lecturing you, ma'am. I'm asking you to verify my name. Victoria struck the desk with her palm. Security, remove her from this lounge. Take her to the outside service window where she belongs. Several customers turned in their leather chairs. An older woman lowered the magazine in her lap. A man near the coffee station quietly raised his phone. Annie looked through the glass doors. Heat shimmered over the pavement, and 3 people waited beneath a narrow metal awning. I am not here to withdraw money, she said. I have an appointment to activate my account. You came here to create trouble. No, ma'am. I came here because the bank told me to. Throw her out. At that moment, the man who had entered moved forward and placed himself between Annie and Victoria. What is happening here? He asked. His voice was low, but the room seemed to settle around it. Victoria looked him over. She saw worn running shoes, an old canvas backpack, and no visible sign of wealth. And where did you come from? She asked. This is a private client area. Annie turned and froze. Jonathan, Dad. The man looked at her. Are you all right? What are you doing here? Before he could answer, Victoria laughed. So you have an accomplice. You're her father, aren't you? Of course you're exactly alike. Only a poor, uneducated father could raise a fraudulent daughter who uses forged documents to steal the bank's money. The 2 of you look like refugees who wandered in here looking for something to take. Jonathan Whitmore's expression did not change. Did you verify the documents? I do not answer to you. You accused my daughter of fraud. I am asking what evidence you have. The evidence is standing in front of me. Annie stepped closer to her father. Ma'am, you may disagree with me, but you will not speak to my father that way. He has done nothing wrong. Victoria looked at Jonathan's backpack. Nothing wrong? He enters a restricted lounge carrying that filthy bag, refuses to leave, and challenges the branch director. For all I know, he brought something dangerous inside. Jonathan kept both hands visible. That is a serious accusation. Victoria pressed the security alarm beneath the desk. Security. I want both of them restrained. 3 guards entered from the side corridor. Samuel Brooks, the senior supervisor, raised one hand as he approached. Everyone stay calm. Miss Langford, what happened? These 2 threatened employees and attempted to gain access to a fraudulent account. Search them and put them in handcuffs. Samuel looked at Jonathan and Annie. Neither was shouting. Neither was moving toward anyone. Did either of them display a weapon? Not yet. That is not what I asked. Victoria's face tightened. Jonathan spoke calmly. Victoria pointed at the backpack. He may be hiding something in there. Samuel turned to Jonathan. Sir, would you consent to a search? No. Victoria gave a sharp laugh. You see? An innocent man would cooperate. An innocent man still has rights, Jonathan said. Before Samuel could respond, Victoria lunged forward and ripped the backpack from Jonathan's shoulder. "Miss Langford, stop!" Samuel shouted. She had already pulled the zipper open. With both hands, she turned the bag upside down. A metal thermos struck the marble with a hard clang. Several notebooks scattered across the floor. A bottle of medication rolled beneath a chair. A framed photograph landed face down. A sealed envelope with Annie's name written across the front slid to her feet. Then came a stack of documents stamped confidential. Victoria stepped on one of them. Annie rushed forward. "What are you doing? Get your foot off that." Jonathan caught her gently by the arm. "Dad, those are your papers." "I know." She had no right. "I know." Annie looked at him, confused by his restraint. Jonathan shook his head once. "Let her continue." The small gesture told Annie what he had decided. He was no longer trying to end the confrontation quickly. He wanted to see how far Victoria would go while she still believed they had no power. Victoria picked up one of the papers, glanced at the official seal, and tossed it aside without reading. More forged documents. She turned toward the customers. "You all see this, don't you? Two penniless people enter a private bank carrying a stolen card and a bag full of fake papers, then accuse me of discrimination when I refuse to give them money. We never asked you to give us money," Annie said. "I asked you to activate an account that already belongs to me." Victoria reached into the wastebasket and pulled out the black card. "Where did you get this?" "It was mailed with my account documents." "That was not my question. The bank sent it." Annie pointed toward the blue folder on the desk. "My appointment confirmation is there. My state identification is there. My scholarship letter is there. The verification code from the trust department is there. You have everything you need." Victoria looked from Annie to Jonathan. "So the two of you planned this together?" Jonathan's voice became colder. "I suggest you choose your next words carefully. And I suggest you leave before the police arrive." Jonathan looked down at the papers beneath Victoria's shoe. One document bore the seal of Whitmore Financial Group. Another contained the acquisition certificate proving legal ownership of Heritage Crown Bank. Victoria had not bothered to read either one. Beside them lay the cracked family photograph and the sealed birthday letter Jonathan had carried for Annie. For the first time, a slight tremor passed through his hand. Then it stopped. He lifted his eyes and looked directly at Victoria Langford. His face was calm, but something in the room had changed. Victoria mistook that silence for defeat. Victoria Langford folded her arms and looked down at the belongings scattered across the marble floor. A satisfied smile spread across her face. In her mind, she had protected the bank from people who had wandered into a place reserved for a better class of customer. "Well," she said, raising an eyebrow at Jonathan. "Nothing to say now?" Jonathan remained still. Victoria turned toward the guards. "What are you waiting for? Handcuff them. Both of them. The police can take them from here." "Miss Langford," Samuel Brooks said cautiously, "I think we should examine the blue folder before we make that decision." Victoria spun toward him. "Are you telling me how to run my branch?" "No, ma'am. I'm saying we should verify the documents. The bank's duty is to filter out fraudulent activity." She pointed at Jonathan's worn clothes, then at Annie's shoes. "Look at them. A man in an old tracksuit, and a black girl wearing shoes that should have been replaced years ago. Where would they get a Heritage Crown private black card?" Samuel's jaw tightened. Victoria moved closer. "Would you like to lose your job for protecting criminals?" Annie stepped in front of Jonathan. Anger burned in her eyes, but when she spoke, her voice remained measured. "Miss Langford, my father's clothing has not damaged this floor. Your heel, however, is standing on his private documents. Please move your foot." Victoria looked down at the paper beneath her shoe and deliberately twisted her heel against it. "Private documents?" She laughed. "These are worthless pieces of paper. People like you learn a few legal words and think they can frighten educated professionals. You still haven't verified a single page. I don't need a lecture from a scholarship girl." Victoria pointed toward the entrance. "Go outside and complain in the heat. There is no money here for you to steal." A few customers exchanged uneasy looks. The older woman who had been holding a magazine lowered it completely. Her phone remained angled toward Victoria. Victoria noticed, "Recording is not permitted in the private lounge." The woman adjusted her glasses. "Then perhaps you should behave as though someone is watching." Victoria recognized her. "Mrs. Parker, this matter does not concern you. It concerned me when you threw that young woman's card onto the floor." I am following fraud prevention procedures. You have not followed a procedure since I began watching. Victoria turned away before anyone else could join the exchange. She pointed at Annie's blue folder. Put those documents in an evidence bag. Neither of them leaves with a single page. Samuel did not move. Those are personal records. We have no evidence that a crime occurred. I am the branch director, and I am responsible for security decisions. The words were respectful, but the refusal was clear. Jonathan studied Samuel for a moment, then looked at Victoria. Miss Langford, he said, his voice low. You mentioned filtering people. Is that an official policy? Or do you have another system that does not appear in the bank's rules? Victoria paused. For the first time, uncertainty crossed her face. It disappeared almost immediately. Are you accusing me of something? I asked a question. I work for the benefit of our most valuable clients. This branch was created to serve successful people, not beggars who walk in demanding privileges. Jonathan slowly shook his head. You are wrong. This bank was built to serve human beings. It was not built so that you could use its walls and authority to distribute contempt. You should not need to know who I am before deciding to treat my daughter like a person. Victoria stared at him, then gave a short laugh. Who do you think you are, some kind of king? She turned sharply toward the guards. Handcuff them now. Jonathan's attention shifted to Annie's wrist. A red mark was forming above her hand. His expression tightened. Did she touch you? Annie glanced down. It's nothing. That wasn't my question. She grabbed me when I reached for the card. If Jonathan's concern for Annie touched your heart, please like this video, comment where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories. Jonathan looked at Victoria. Did you put your hands on my daughter? She attempted to seize bank property during a fraud investigation. The card carries her name. Anyone can print a name. You keep repeating that, but you still refuse to verify it. Victoria went behind the reception desk and began typing. The account is officially flagged. Any further attempt to access it will be reported as suspected fraud. Annie stepped closer to the desk. You are changing the record while we are standing here. I am documenting your behavior. You are writing a story that makes you look right. Something in Annie's voice troubled Jonathan more than tears would have. She sounded as though she understood what it meant to be judged first and documented afterward. He wondered how often she had faced moments like this without telling him. Victoria glanced at them. Are you planning your next lie? Before Jonathan could answer, the large glass doors opened again. What is going on in here? A man carrying an expensive leather briefcase entered with two corporate auditors behind him. He wore a dark suit despite the August heat and moved with the urgency of someone whose schedule had already been disrupted. Richard Hale, regional president of Heritage Crown Bank's Carolinas division, had arrived for a scheduled inspection. Victoria's face brightened. Mr. Hale, thank goodness you're here. She hurried toward him and lowered her voice into the polished tone she used with senior executives. We have caught 2 fraud suspects. The girl presented a counterfeit black card, and her father brought a backpack filled with forged corporate documents. They became aggressive when I refused access. I have ordered security to restrain them until the police arrive. Richard's eyes followed the direction of her pointing finger. He saw Annie standing beside the reception desk. He saw the belongings scattered across the floor. Then he saw Jonathan. Mr. Hale? Richard did not answer. He stepped forward, nearly stumbling. In front of the clients, employees, police-bound security team, and the woman who had been praising her own judgment seconds earlier. The most powerful banking executive in the region dropped to one knee. Chairman Whitmore, he stammered. Sir, I had no idea you were here. The room fell silent. Victoria stood motionless. Jonathan Whitmore, the billionaire founder of Whitmore Financial Group, the controlling owner of Heritage Crown Bank, and the father of the young woman she had accused of forgery, slowly bent down. He picked up the family photograph and turned it over. A crack ran across David Carter's smiling face. Jonathan brushed a trace of dust from the glass with his thumb. Then he rose and looked directly at Victoria. The triumph had vanished from her expression. For the first time that morning, she understood that the man in worn running shoes had never been powerless. Richard remained on one knee, his eyes fixed on Jonathan as if waiting for permission to breathe. Stand up, Jonathan said. Richard rose at once, but his hands still shook. He glanced at the scattered documents, the cracked photograph, and Annie's black card near the reception desk. Each object told him part of the story before anyone explained it. Victoria looked from Richard to Jonathan, then back again. Chairman Whitmore? No one answered her. Her face tightened as she tried to rearrange the last 10 minutes into something survivable. She stepped away from the paper beneath her heel and smoothed the front of her cream-colored suit. "Sir, I believe there has been a misunderstanding." Jonathan slipped the photograph into his backpack. "A misunderstanding?" "Yes, a serious one, of course, but I was following security procedure. This young woman presented an unusual card, and the circumstances did not match the account profile." Annie looked at her. "The circumstances?" Victoria finally turned toward her, though her attention kept drifting back to Jonathan. "Miss Whitmore, had I known who you were—" "That is the problem," Jonathan said. His voice was not loud, but every person in the lounge heard it. Victoria stopped. "You did not need to know I was chairman to treat my daughter like a human being. This bank was built to serve people. It was not built so you could use its walls and authority to distribute contempt." Victoria swallowed. "I never intended to disrespect your family." "My family?" Jonathan asked. "A few minutes ago, you called us frauds. You accused me of attempting to rob my own bank. You ordered security to handcuff my daughter. I was acting on the information available to me. You refused the information available to you." Annie pointed to the blue folder. "My appointment was in your system. My identification matched. The trust department left a verification note. You chose not to read any of it." Victoria's eyes flicked toward Richard. "Mr. Hale, perhaps we should move this conversation to a private office." Richard opened his mouth, but Jonathan answered first. "No, sir, with respect, there are customers present." There were customers present when she threw Annie's card on the floor. Victoria lowered her voice. Public discussion could damage the bank. Jonathan looked at her for a long moment. "The damage began before I entered the building." Mrs. Parker rose from her chair. "I recorded most of it." Victoria turned sharply. "That recording was made without authorization." Mrs. Parker slipped the phone into her handbag. "Then you may explain that to the police after they review what it contains." Samuel cleared his throat. "Chairman Whitmore, I can confirm that neither you nor your daughter threatened anyone. I refused the order to handcuff you because there was no legal basis." Jonathan nodded once. "Thank you for telling the truth." Samuel's expression did not ease. "I should have questioned the situation sooner. That will be reviewed. So will everything else." Victoria's confidence faded another degree. Richard stepped closer to Jonathan. "Sir, I can suspend Miss Langford immediately and begin an internal investigation." "Internal?" Richard understood the warning. "Independent. We can bring in outside counsel and compliance." Jonathan glanced toward the branch cameras above the lobby. "First, preserve every recording from this morning. No one touches the system except the forensic team. Lock every account note, security report, email, fee adjustment, and complaint connected to this branch." Richard nodded quickly. "Of course. And remove Miss Langford's access now." Victoria stared at him. "You cannot be serious." Jonathan looked at Richard. Richard took out his phone and called the regional operations office. "Disable Victoria Langford's credentials immediately. All systems. Email, branch access, customer records, surveillance archive." Victoria stepped toward him. "Richard, think about what you are doing." He moved back. For the first time, she had no one in the room willing to protect her title. Annie picked up the black card from the counter. Dust marked one edge. She wiped it with her thumb but did not put it away. "There is something else," she said. Jonathan turned to her. Annie lifted her phone and opened the photograph she had taken before the receptionist removed the service sheet. This was on the desk. Richard studied the image. "What am I looking at?" Customer names with letters beside them. P, R, O, and S. Victoria's face changed. It was small, but Jonathan saw it. Annie saw it too. "What do they mean?" she asked. "They are routine workflow markings," Victoria replied. "Then explain them." Victoria folded her arms again, though the gesture no longer looked confident. "Preferred, review, outside service, and security attention." Richard frowned. "Those are not approved codes. They are local management tools." Annie enlarged the photograph. "Most of the customers marked O or S have Black, Latino, or immigrant names. That proves nothing." Maria Delgado stood behind the teller counter, gripping its edge. Jonathan noticed her. "Do you know what those codes mean?" he asked. Maria looked at Victoria, then at Richard. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Victoria's stare hardened. Maria, she said, be careful. The warning was quiet enough to sound almost polite. Maria looked down at the employee badge pinned to her blouse. 17 years at the bank. 17 years of schedules, evaluations, health insurance, and retirement contributions. Jonathan could see the calculation on her face. Annie stepped closer, but not so close that Maria would feel cornered. You don't have to protect us, Annie said. Just tell the truth. Maria's eyes filled. The letters mean exactly what she said, she answered, but they were not based on transaction risk. Victoria cut in. Maria is confused. No, ma'am. Maria removed her badge and placed it on the counter. I have been confused about why I stayed quiet. I am not confused about what I saw. The room remained still. Maria continued. P meant the customer should receive preferred treatment. S meant call security before there was any problem. Richard's face tightened. Who created that system? Maria looked directly at Victoria. She did. Victoria shook her head. This is retaliation from a disgruntled employee. Maria's voice trembled, but she did not stop. You told us to protect the appearance of the private lounge. You told us some customers made wealthy clients uncomfortable. That is a lie. I saved the emails. The last trace of color left Victoria's face. Jonathan looked at Richard. How many complaints about this branch reached your office? Richard hesitated. That hesitation answered more than a denial would have. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. How many? Richard lowered his voice. There were service complaints. About discrimination? They were never formally substantiated. Were they investigated? Richard looked toward Victoria, then at the floor. No. Annie held the black card at her side. So she was not the only one who decided people like me were easier to ignore. Richard did not respond. Outside, police sirens stopped near the entrance. Jonathan turned toward the glass doors as two officers approached. Victoria straightened, as though the arrival of another uniform might still rescue her. Jonathan looked back at her. You called them here with a lie, he said. Now you are going to stand in this room while the truth is recorded. The glass doors opened, and Lieutenant Denise Callahan entered with Officer Michael Turner a step behind her. Callahan was a black woman in her late 40s with silver beginning to show at her temples. She did not reach for her weapon. Instead, she paused long enough to read the room, the overturned backpack, the papers across the marble, the customers holding phones, the security guards standing apart from Jonathan and Annie, and Victoria waiting behind the desk as though the officers had arrived to confirm her authority. Who placed the emergency call? Callahan asked. I did. Victoria moved toward her. I am Victoria Langford, branch director. These two attempted to gain access to a high-value account with forged documents. The man became aggressive, threatened me, and may have entered the bank intending to commit robbery. Callahan looked at Jonathan. He stood beside Annie with his hands visible. His backpack was open at his feet. Did anyone display a weapon? Victoria hesitated. Not visibly. Did anyone demand cash? They demanded access to funds. Annie spoke before Victoria could continue. I asked her to activate my student account. Callahan turned to her. Your name? Annie Carter, Whitmore. Victoria gave a sharp laugh. That surname means nothing. She printed it on a card. Richard stepped forward. Lieutenant, the account is legitimate. Callahan looked at him. And you are? Richard Hale, Regional President of Heritage Crown Bank. Victoria's eyes widened. Richard, you cannot take their side before an investigation. I am not taking a side. I am confirming a fact. Callahan glanced at Jonathan. And you? Jonathan Whitmore. Officer Turner looked from Jonathan to Richard. Recognition crossed his face, but Callahan did not react. Were you asked to leave? Yes, Jonathan said. After Miss Langford refused to verify my daughter's documents, threw her bank card on the floor, accused us of fraud, emptied my backpack, and reported an attempted robbery that did not occur. Victoria raised her voice. He is the owner of the bank. Of course everyone is going to protect him now. Callahan's eyes settled on her. You did not know that when you called us? No. Then his ownership has nothing to do with whether your report was accurate. Mrs. Parker approached with her phone. Lieutenant, I recorded the confrontation from before Mr. Whitmore identified himself. Victoria pointed at her. That video was taken illegally. Callahan accepted the phone without comment. Did you alter the recording? No. Did you begin filming before the call to police? Yes. Callahan watched in silence. Officer Turner stood beside her. following the screen. The lounge heard only fragments. Victoria ordering Annie outside, the card striking the floor. Jonathan asking for written policy. Samuel refusing to handcuff them, and Victoria claiming Jonathan might be armed after she had already emptied his backpack. When the recording ended, Callahan returned the phone. "Thank you, Mrs. Parker." Victoria stepped closer. "That does not show what happened before she began recording. It begins before Mr. Whitmore entered," Mrs. Parker said. Callahan looked at Victoria. "Do you have surveillance footage?" "Yes, but access requires authorization." "I authorize it," Richard said. Jonathan shook his head. "No one opens or alters that archive without an evidence log." Richard understood. He turned to one of the auditors. "Dana, contact corporate compliance. Lock the system and preserve every camera from 9 o'clock this morning forward." Victoria moved toward the terminal. "I can retrieve the footage now." "No," Richard said. "Step away from the computer." Her hands froze above the keyboard. Callahan noticed. "Have you changed or attempted to delete any record connected to this incident?" "Of course not." Annie lifted her blue folder. "She added a fraud alert after refusing to verify my documents. That is standard procedure." "It is not standard to write the conclusion before checking the facts," Annie replied. Callahan asked to see the folder. Annie handed it over. The lieutenant reviewed the appointment, confirmation, identification, scholarship award, and trust department letter. She entered the secure number through the bank's public switchboard rather than calling the number printed on the document. A trust officer answered within seconds. Callahan placed the call on speaker. "I am calling from the flagship Charlotte branch regarding an account belonging to Annie Carter, Whitmore. Can you confirm whether an activation appointment was scheduled today?" "Yes," the officer said. 11:30 in the private client lounge. The account was approved last week. There is a verification note in the internal system. Callahan looked at Victoria. "Was that note available to you?" Victoria's lips parted. Maria answered from the teller counter. "Yes, I showed it to her when Annie arrived." The trust officer continued. "Is there a problem with the activation?" "No," Richard said quickly. "The account will be handled after an internal review." Jonathan looked at him. "The account should not be delayed because your employee created a false allegation." Richard nodded. "You are right." Callahan ended the call. "There is no evidence of attempted fraud, theft, or robbery. No one here is being arrested." Victoria's posture stiffened. "This is private property. I still have the authority to remove disruptive individuals." Richard stared at her. "You no longer have authority over this branch. You cannot suspend me in front of customers." "I can and I have." Victoria turned to Jonathan. "You are destroying my career over one misunderstanding." Jonathan looked at the mark on Annie's wrist, then at the documents Victoria had stepped on. This was not one misunderstanding. It was a series of choices. "I was protecting the bank. You were protecting your idea of who deserved to enter it." Callahan opened her notebook. "Miss Langford, I need a formal statement regarding the emergency report. You described a possible weapon and attempted robbery. The video and witnesses do not support either claim." Victoria's face tightened. "I felt threatened." "By what specific action?" "He challenged me." He stepped toward the desk. "One step," Samuel said. He stopped immediately. Victoria glared at him. "You work for me." "Not anymore," Richard said. The words struck harder than a shout. Victoria looked around the room for support. The receptionist lowered her eyes. The guards did not move. The customers who had once watched her with uncertainty now watched with judgment. Annie reached into the wastebasket and removed the black card. A smear of dust crossed her printed name. Victoria saw it and changed her tone. "Miss Whitmore, I am sorry. Had I understood who you were, I never would have allowed this to happen." Annie held the card between two fingers. "That is not an apology. I just said I was sorry. You are sorry because you know who my father is." Victoria glanced at Jonathan. "I meant no disrespect to the chairman's family." Jonathan stepped beside Annie. "My daughter was my family when you thought we were poor. She was my family when you called her a fraud. She was my family when you ordered guards to put her in handcuffs." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Whether they came from shame or fear, no one could tell. Jonathan pointed toward the brass words on the wall. "Dignity, trust, service. You repeated those words in staff reports. You stood beneath them every day. Yet the first time my daughter asked you to honor them, you treated her dignity as counterfeit. Richard lowered his head. Jonathan turned to him. You said complaints reached your office. Richard swallowed. Some did. How many? I do not know without reviewing the files. Then review all of them. Every complaint, every fee adjustment, every outdoor referral, every security alert, every account marked with those letters. Richard nodded. Jonathan looked at Maria. You said you saved emails. They are on my home computer and in a private account. Do not delete anything. An independent investigator will contact you. You will receive written whistleblower protection before leaving today. Maria's shoulders loosened for the first time. Callahan asked Victoria to accompany Officer Turner to a consultation room for her statement. Victoria did not move. Then Annie spoke. One more thing. Everyone looked at her. She raised the black card. I want the account activated, but I do not want special treatment. I want the same procedure you should have followed when I walked in alone. Jonathan watched his daughter and understood that the most important authority in the room did not come from ownership. It came from a young woman refusing to let power rewrite what had happened before power arrived. Maria came around the teller counter carrying Annie's blue folder. Her hand still trembled, but her voice was steady. I can process the activation, she said. If Miss Carter, Whitmore agrees, I will follow the same verification steps required for any student account. Annie nodded. That is all I asked for. Richard moved toward the private desk. I can have someone from Executive Services handle it. No, Annie said. Mrs. Delgado can do it. Maria looked at her in surprise. You were the first person here willing to say what happened, Annie continued. I trust you to finish the process. Jonathan said nothing. He understood that stepping in now would turn Annie's decision into his order. Maria led her to an open station. She checked Annie's state identification, entered the appointment number, and called the trust department through the bank's internal directory. The officer on the other end confirmed the scholarship account, the trust connection, and the authorization code. Maria scanned the documents, asked Annie to create a personal identification number, and printed the disclosures Victoria had refused to open. The entire process took less than 7 minutes. When it was complete, Maria placed the black card on the counter. Your account is active, she said. There are no activation fees, and no funds have been frozen. Annie looked at the card but did not pick it up immediately. So there was never a problem with my documents. No, Maria said. There was not. Victoria stood near the consultation room with Officer Turner beside her. You cannot make that determination while a fraud review is open. Richard turned toward her. The review was created without cause. You are taking the word of an 18-year-old girl over a branch director with 9 years of experience. No, Lieutenant Callahan said. We are taking the documents, the recording, the witnesses, and the verified account over your unsupported accusation. Victoria's mouth tightened. Jonathan watched Maria return each paper to the blue folder. She aligned the corners carefully, as though restoring order to Annie's day 1 page at a time. Mrs. Parker approached the counter. Young lady, may I say something? Annie turned. My name is Evelyn Parker. I have banked here for 22 years. I should have spoken sooner. You recorded it, Annie said. I watched before I recorded. Mrs. Parker glanced toward Victoria. There is a difference. Annie considered the admission. You spoke before you knew who my father was. Later than I should have. But you spoke. Mrs. Parker nodded, accepting neither praise nor forgiveness she had not requested. A man near the coffee station raised his hand slightly. He was in his 60s, wearing a navy blazer over a golf shirt. I have something to add, he said. 3 months ago, my business partner came here to deposit a check. He is black. Security stood beside him through the entire transaction. I came in the following week with a larger check, and no one asked me a single question. Victoria interrupted. Customer experiences vary according to risk. The man looked at her. We own the same company. Another woman spoke from a leather chair near the window. She wore a hotel housekeeping uniform and held a payroll envelope in her lap. They sent me outside last winter, she said. It was raining. I had identification, but Miss Langford said the private lobby was for appointment clients. 2 people without appointments walked in while I waited. Richard looked toward Maria. How often were customers sent to that window? Maria hesitated. Almost every day. Based on what? Miss Langford called it presentation. Victoria shook her head. That is not what I said. Maria met her eyes. You told us to protect the atmosphere. The receptionist, who had remained silent behind the desk, covered her mouth with one hand. Jonathan noticed. What is your name? He asked. Claire Benson, Seer. Jonathan flinched slightly at the first name but did not show it beyond a pause. Miss Benson, did you see Annie's appointment when she arrived? Claire nodded. Did you tell Miss Langford? Yes. Did she instruct you to ignore it? Claire looked toward Victoria. Richard said, answer truthfully. She said the appointment could have been created through social engineering. She told me not to contact the trust department. Victoria stepped forward. She is frightened and confused. Claire's voice rose for the first time. I am frightened. I am not confused. The room changed again. One employee had spoken, then another. Silence was losing its usefulness. Samuel removed his radio from his shoulder and placed it on the desk. I need to report something as well, he said. Richard turned to him. Security was often called before customers did anything. We were told to observe certain people when they entered. Sometimes the alert came from Miss Langford. Sometimes from the front desk. Did you keep records? Every dispatch is logged. Victoria said. Those records contain confidential security information. Jonathan looked at Richard. They are now part of the preservation order. Richard nodded to Dana Foster, one of the auditors. Secure the security logs. No edits. No deletions. No local access. Dana opened her laptop and began contacting corporate compliance. Victoria's composure began to fracture. You are allowing a public spectacle to destroy a successful branch. Jonathan looked around the lounge. A successful branch? This location leads the region in private client revenue. How much of that revenue came from fees imposed on people you sent outside? Victoria stared at him. Maria lowered her voice. There were review fees. Richard turned. What kind of review fees? Enhanced documentation, manual verification, special handling. Were those standard? Not consistently. Victoria stepped toward Maria. You are discussing matters you do not understand. Maria removed the badge she had placed on the counter and held it in her palm. I understood enough to know the same people kept paying more. Jonathan asked, did anyone complain? Yes. What happened to the complaints? Maria looked at Richard. They were sent back to the branch director. Richard's face tightened. Jonathan understood the structure at once. Customers complained about Victoria, and the system returned those complaints to Victoria for resolution. She controlled the conduct, the record, and the response. How many? He asked. I do not know, Maria said, but I helped some older customers fill them out. Mr. Leonard Hayes filed one last spring. He owns the hardware store on Beatty's Ford Road. Annie looked up. I know that name. Jonathan turned to her. He spoke at a youth business workshop, she said. He said the bank charged him thousands in review fees and denied his credit increase. He thought he had filled out something wrong. Maria's eyes filled. He did not. Jonathan looked toward Richard. Find that complaint. Richard motioned to James Liu, the second auditor. James searched the regional complaint database from his tablet. After a minute, he said, there is a closed record under Leonard Hayes. It is labeled Customer Education Issue. Where is the original attachment? Jonathan asked. James continued searching. There isn't one, Victoria said. Customers often submit incomplete complaints. Maria shook her head. I scanned all 6 pages myself. Richard lowered his voice. Victoria, where is the file? I do not remember every document processed in this branch. Jonathan watched her carefully. She remembered Annie's clothing, Jonathan's shoes, and every word she claimed sounded threatening. Yet when records became specific, memory failed her. Lieutenant Callahan closed her notebook. Miss Langford, Officer Turner will take your statement in the consultation room. You are not to access any device or contact any employee about this incident. I need my attorney. That is your right. Victoria looked at Richard. You are going to let them treat me like a criminal? Richard answered quietly. You called them here because you wanted someone treated like a criminal. Officer Turner guided her toward the consultation room. She walked past Annie without looking at her. At the door, Victoria stopped. This bank will regret humiliating me. Annie picked up the black card from the counter. No, she said. The bank will regret believing you. Victoria disappeared behind the glass door. Richard began giving orders to close the branch temporarily. Customers with active transactions would be served, but no new appointments would enter until the records were secured. Employees were instructed not to leave without providing contact information to the investigators. Jonathan walked toward the front windows. Outside, 4 people still waited beneath the narrow awning. "Bring them inside," he said. Richard followed his gaze. "Sir, the people waiting outside. Bring them water and serve them here." Maria moved first. Within minutes, the elderly woman, the construction worker, and 2 others entered the cool lobby. They looked uncertain, as though they expected someone to tell them they had made a mistake. No one did. Annie stood beside Jonathan and watched Maria offer the elderly woman a chair. "Is this what you expected when you bought the bank?" she asked. Jonathan shook his head. "That does not excuse me." Annie looked at him. "You did not know. I owned the place that allowed it." Before she could answer, James Liu approached holding his tablet. "Chairman Whitmore, we found something else." Jonathan took the device. On the screen was a quarterly regional report marked reviewed and approved. It showed unusually high security interventions, fee disputes, and customer complaints at Victoria's branch. At the bottom of the page was Richard Hale's electronic signature. Jonathan slowly raised his eyes. Victoria had built the system, but someone above her had seen its shadow and chosen not to look closer. Jonathan held the tablet without speaking. Richard's electronic signature sat beneath the report as neatly as any approval he had ever placed on a board document. "How many times did you receive this?" Jonathan asked. Richard glanced at James Liu, then back at the screen. "Quarterly reports come through my office all the time." "That was not my question." Richard swallowed. "At least 4 times. And each report showed the same pattern?" "The numbers changed." "Did the pattern change?" Richard did not answer. Annie stood beside her father, the black card still in her hand. She looked at Richard with the same controlled disappointment she had shown Victoria. "You knew customers were being sent to security more often here. We saw higher incident numbers. You knew complaints were increasing. We were told most of them involved misunderstandings." "By whom?" Richard looked toward the consultation room where Victoria was giving her statement. Annie nodded once. "You asked the person being accused whether the accusations were true." Richard's face tightened. "That is how local management reviews usually work." Jonathan handed the tablet back to James. "Not anymore." He turned to Richard. "You will have no authority over this investigation." "Jonathan, Chairman Whitmore," Richard corrected himself quickly. "I understand how this looks, but the reports did not say racial discrimination. They did not need to use those words to require questions. The branch was profitable. Customer retention among private clients was strong. Victoria's explanations were consistent with fraud prevention." Jonathan's expression hardened. "You chose the explanation that protected the revenue." Richard lowered his voice. "I was trying to protect 12,000 employees and the value of the institution." "No, you were protecting yourself from an inconvenient answer." The words landed in the quiet lobby. Richard looked around and seemed to realize that employees, customers, auditors, and police officers were listening. Jonathan continued. "If a report tells you one branch calls security more often than every comparable location, charges more review fees, and closes more complaints without follow-up, you do not get to call that noise because the profits remain high." Richard looked down. Jonathan pointed toward the outdoor customers now seated inside with cups of water. "That is what your silence looked like to them." Maria stood near the elderly woman, helping her review a deposit slip. When she heard Jonathan, she lowered her head. Annie noticed. "You were afraid," Annie said to her. Maria looked up. "That does not make what I did right." "No," Annie replied, "but speaking now still matters." Maria pressed her lips together as if holding back tears. Lieutenant Callahan emerged from the consultation room with Officer Turner. Victoria remained inside with the door closed. "Miss Langford has requested counsel," Callahan said. "She will not answer further questions until her attorney arrives." "That is her right," Jonathan replied. "She also claims the report was made in good faith." Samuel gave a short breath through his nose. Callahan looked at him. "You disagree?" "Yes, ma'am. She knew there was no weapon. She knew neither of them had demanded money. I told her that before she called." "Will you give a written statement?" "I will." Callahan nodded. "Do not discuss the details with other witnesses before we collect them." Samuel looked toward Maria. "Understood." Dana Foster approached with her laptop open. "Corporate compliance has locked the branch archive. We also suspended deletion privileges across local accounts." Across local accounts? Jonathan asked. Someone attempted to access the surveillance file 11 minutes ago. Every face turned toward the consultation room. Richard stared at Dana. From which login? Victoria Langford's. Callahan's posture changed. After she was told not to access the system? Yes, Dana continued. The deletion request did not complete. The archive was already being mirrored to the regional server. Victoria's voice came through the glass door. I was trying to preserve the footage. Callahan opened the door halfway. Do not speak about the case without your attorney, and do not touch the computer. Victoria stepped back from the desk. Jonathan said nothing, but the decision forming behind his eyes was visible. Richard moved closer. Sir, we should suspend the entire leadership team before anyone else can alter records. Jonathan looked at him. That includes you. Richard went still. You signed the reports. Jonathan continued. You will surrender system access until the independent review determines what you knew and when you knew it. Jonathan, I have served this bank for 28 years, and that makes the signature worse, not better. Richard's shoulders sagged. He took out his access card and placed it on the reception desk beside Maria's employee badge and Annie's black card. 3 objects, 3 different kinds of authority, all reduced to plastic on polished stone. James Liu began reading from the regional report. Security interventions at this branch were 43% above the regional average. Manual review fees were 61% higher. Complaint closures without supporting documentation were almost triple. Annie looked at Jonathan. How did no one stop this? Jonathan answered quietly, because every number belonged to a different department. Security saw alerts. Compliance saw fees. Customer service saw complaints. No one was required to put the pieces together. That sounds convenient. It was. He did not defend the institution. That mattered to her. Dana found another file. There is also an internal email chain from last December. She handed the laptop to Jonathan. Victoria had written, We need to keep lower value traffic from occupying private client space during peak hours. Use outdoor service whenever presentation or account potential does not support lounge access. Richard had replied, Use discretion. Keep complaints local. Jonathan read the exchange twice. Richard's face had gone gray. I meant resolve them locally. I did not mean hide them. You told her to keep them out of sight. That was not my intention. Intent does not erase instruction. Annie looked at the words on the screen. What does account potential mean? Dana answered carefully. Expected profitability. So people were treated according to how much money the bank thought it could make from them. No one contradicted her. The elderly woman from outside raised her hand from the chair where Maria had seated her. Excuse me, she said. Jonathan turned. My name is Dorothy Mills. I have had an account here for 34 years. I do not have much money in it, but my social security check comes every month. Does that make me lower value traffic? Richard looked away. Jonathan walked toward her. No, Mrs. Mills. Then why did they make me stand outside last week when the lobby was empty? Maria closed her eyes. Dorothy continued. I asked if I could sit inside because of my blood pressure. They told me the chairs were for appointment customers. Jonathan crouched so he was at eye level with her. That should not have happened. She studied him. Are you really the man who owns this bank? Yes, ma'am. Then why didn't you know? The question was not angry. That made it harder. Jonathan took a moment before answering. Because I trusted reports more than people. Dorothy nodded. Reports do not stand in the sun. Annie looked at her father. Jonathan absorbed the words without looking away. You are right. He stood and turned toward Dana. Add every outdoor referral to the review. Contact customers before reviewing their files. Ask whether they consent to participate. No one is to be pressured. Dana nodded. To James. Compare fee overrides by race, age, zip code, business type, and account balance. Use independent analysts. James entered the instructions. To Richard, remain available, but leave the branch after surrendering your devices to compliance. Richard's voice was barely audible. Am I suspended? Yes. Victoria opened the consultation room door before Callahan could stop her. You cannot suspend him because of me. Jonathan looked at her. This is no longer only about you. For the first time, fear appeared in Richard's eyes for a reason larger than his job. He understood that the scandal had moved beyond one branch director. It had reached the level where people who ignored the warning signs would also have to answer. Outside, the heat pressed against the glass. Inside, the cooling system hummed above customers who had spent years being told to wait elsewhere. Jonathan looked at Annie. "I came here to surprise you for your birthday." She glanced at the scattered papers and the card in her hand. "You did." A faint, tired smile passed between them, gone almost as soon as it appeared. Then Dana's phone rang. She listened for several seconds and looked toward Jonathan. The archive team found 12 deleted complaint attachments in the backup system. Jonathan's face became still again. Victoria closed her eyes. The branch had spent years erasing people from the record. Now the record was beginning to speak. Dana ended the call and turned her laptop toward Jonathan. The backup system recovered 12 complaint attachments that were deleted from the local archive. Some go back more than 3 years. Jonathan looked at the file names. Leonard Hayes appeared twice. Dorothy Mills appeared once. Several others belonged to customers whose names had been marked with O or S on Victoria's service sheets. "Open the oldest one," he said. Dana clicked the first document. It was a scanned letter written by a retired nurse named Gloria Bennett. She described being sent outside during a winter storm while waiting to replace a damaged debit card. She had asked to sit in the lobby because of arthritis. The branch denied the request, then recorded her complaint as, "Customer became emotional after standard identity review." The next attachment came from Leonard Hayes. 6 pages, exactly as Maria had remembered. He documented an unexplained $4,800 review fee, a delayed credit line request, and repeated demands for records that had already been submitted. At the bottom of the scanned complaint was Victoria's handwritten note. "Customer lacks sophistication. Recommend closure without escalation." Annie read the words over Jonathan's shoulder. She blamed him for not understanding what she was doing to him. Jonathan's jaw tightened. That is how systems protect themselves. They turn confusion into guilt. Victoria stood inside the consultation room, visible through the glass. Officer Turner remained near the door while she waited for counsel. Her earlier confidence had disappeared, but Jonathan felt no satisfaction. One frightened manager did not explain years of silence. Richard stared at the documents. "I never saw these attachments." Dana looked at him. "Your office received the complaint summaries. Summaries written by local management. You approved the closures." Richard rubbed one hand over his face. "The regional team handled hundreds of cases." Jonathan turned toward him. "Stop using volume as an excuse. 12 people were erased here, and those are only the files recovered in the first hour." Richard said nothing. Lieutenant Callahan approached Jonathan. "We have enough to establish that the robbery report was unsupported. Whether it was knowingly false will depend on witness statements and the recording." "She knew there was no weapon," Samuel said. Callahan nodded. "Put that in writing. Use your own words. Do not discuss your statement with anyone else." Samuel glanced toward Victoria. "Understood." Callahan addressed Jonathan. "Your company's investigators may review internal misconduct, but anything related to criminal evidence needs a clear chain of custody. You will have it. I also need everyone to avoid turning this into a public hearing while we are still collecting statements." Jonathan looked around the lobby. Several customers still held phones. A local reporter had appeared outside near the police cars, speaking to a cameraman. "The public part has already begun," he said. "Then be careful not to give people a version before the evidence is complete." Jonathan respected the warning. Wealth had taught him that people often rush to agree with the most powerful voice in a room. If he spoke too soon, witnesses might begin repeating his interpretation instead of their own memories. He turned to Richard. "No press statement until outside counsel approves one based on verified facts." Richard nodded. "Communications will want to say we are investigating a customer dispute. This was not a dispute. What wording do you want?" "The truth we can prove." A customer presented valid documents. The branch failed to verify them. Police were called on allegations not supported by current evidence. Records have been secured, and an independent investigation has begun. Richard hesitated. "That exposes the bank." Jonathan looked at Dorothy Mills, who was still holding her cup of water with both hands. The bank was exposed when it left customers outside. Annie stood near Maria's station, reading the account disclosures she had finally received. The black card rested on the counter beside her identification. Jonathan walked over. "Are you ready to leave?" Annie looked toward the customers who had started giving their names to Dana and James. "Not yet. You have been through enough. So have they." Jonathan recognized the firmness in her voice. What do you want to do? I want to hear them before everyone starts talking for them. He nodded. Then we stay. Maria brought a chair for Dorothy and another for the hotel worker, whose name was Tasha Green. Samuel moved the remaining customers away from the entrance so the police could work without blocking the lobby. The private lounge, designed to separate valuable clients from everyone else, became an informal waiting room for people who had once been directed outside. Tasha spoke first. She explained that she had come to cash a payroll check the previous December. Her hotel uniform was clean, but she had arrived after an overnight shift. Victoria told her private clients complained when service workers occupied the lounge. I thought maybe I smelled like cleaning chemicals, Tasha said. I went home and threw the uniform away. Maria covered her mouth. Tasha looked at her. You were there. I know. You did not say anything. No. Maria's voice broke. I am sorry. Tasha studied her, then nodded once. Do better now. I will. Annie wrote down Tasha's contact information only after asking permission. She did the same for Dorothy. Jonathan noticed she did not promise money, legal results, or quick justice. She listened and repeated details to make sure she understood. That restraint made him proud and ashamed at the same time. Proud because Annie had grown into the kind of person who knew how to hear another human being. Ashamed because she had learned the skill partly by surviving moments he never knew about. Richard's phone rang. He checked the screen. It is the board chair. Jonathan held out his hand. Give it to me. Richard passed over the phone. Jonathan answered. Margaret, a woman's voice came through sharply. I am hearing that police are at the flagship branch and that you suspended the regional president in front of customers. That is correct. Do you understand what this could do to the stock price if it reaches the press? Jonathan looked through the glass doors. The reporter outside was now interviewing one of the customers who had been waiting at the outdoor window. It has reached the press. We need to contain this. No, we need to preserve evidence. Those are not mutually exclusive. They become mutually exclusive when containment means hiding what happened. Margaret lowered her voice. You are personally involved. Your daughter is the complainant. You cannot run the investigation. I agree. The answer surprised her into silence. Jonathan continued. An independent firm will lead it. I will not direct witness interviews, findings, or discipline beyond immediate access restrictions necessary to protect records. Then leave the branch. Not until my daughter is ready. This is exactly why personal involvement is dangerous. Jonathan watched Annie sit beside Dorothy while the older woman described being told she had the wrong kind of account for indoor service. Personal involvement is the reason I finally saw what the reports concealed. Margaret paused. The board will meet tonight. I will attend. What are you planning to tell them? The same thing I am telling you. We do not protect the institution by protecting its lie. He ended the call and returned the phone to Richard. Richard looked uneasy. The board may decide your judgment is compromised. They may be right. Annie overheard and turned toward him. Would they remove you? They could limit my authority during the review. Because you defended me? Because I own the bank and I am your father. Fair investigations require distance. Annie considered that. Then let them investigate you too. Jonathan almost smiled. That sounds like your mother. Which one? The question carried no bitterness. Annie had lost her biological mother young, Claire later, and David between them. Love had never arrived in a simple shape. All of them, Jonathan said. Dana's laptop chimed again. She read the new message and looked up. The recovery team found 43 more deleted complaint references. The attachments are still being reconstructed. Richard closed his eyes. Jonathan looked toward the brass words on the wall. Dignity, trust, service. The bank had printed them in metal because metal appeared permanent. By evening, he understood that words were the easiest part of an institution to preserve. The harder part was finding the people it had trained itself not to hear. By 6 that evening, the flagship branch no longer looked like a place designed to impress wealthy clients. The glass tables had been pushed together for witness forms. Bottled water stood beside legal pads. Employees moved quietly between police officers, auditors, and customers who had decided to stay. Outside, television vans lined the curb. Jonathan watched the activity from near the reception desk. He had not changed clothes. The navy sweatshirt and worn shoes that Victoria had used to judge him now appeared on every news screen mounted inside the lobby. A reporter stood beyond the glass doors speaking into a microphone. Heritage Crown Bank has confirmed that an independent investigation is underway after allegations of racial discrimination at its flagship Charlotte branch. The bank's chairman, Jonathan Whitmore, was present during the incident involving his adopted daughter. Annie heard the phrase and looked toward the television. Now everyone knows. Jonathan followed her gaze. I'm sorry. For what? That your birthday became public property. Annie folded her arms. It stopped being private when she threw my card across the floor. That does not mean strangers have the right to decide who you are. They will anyway. Her answer was not bitter. It was tired. Jonathan wanted to tell her that the attention would pass, but he had spent too many years around public scandals to offer a promise he could not keep. News moved quickly, but humiliation had a longer memory. Dana Foster approached with 2 printed pages. The communications team drafted a statement. Jonathan read the first line. Heritage Crown Bank is aware of a customer service dispute involving account verification procedures at its Charlotte flagship location. He handed it back. No. Dana nodded as if she had expected the answer. What should it say? That there was no customer service dispute. Richard, who was waiting near the security desk to surrender his company phone, stepped closer. We should avoid conclusions before the investigation is complete. Jonathan looked at him. We can state verified facts without pretending both sides made equal mistakes. The lawyers will object. Let them. Richard lowered his voice. A statement that admits procedural failure could trigger claims across the region. The claims already exist. The statement does not create them. Dana opened a clean document. Jonathan dictated slowly. A customer arrived with a valid appointment and legitimate identification. Branch personnel failed to complete available verification procedures. Police were contacted based on allegations that current evidence does not support. The bank has preserved relevant records and appointed outside investigators. Any customer or employee with related information may contact an independent reporting line. Annie looked at him. Add that people can report without going through branch management. Dana typed the sentence. Jonathan nodded. Good. Richard exhaled. That will be treated as an admission. It is an admission that we know what we saw. Lieutenant Callahan approached with her notebook closed. We have the statements we need for tonight. Miss Langford's attorney arrived through the rear entrance. She will leave after surrendering her devices. Is she being arrested? Annie asked. Not tonight. We are reviewing the false report allegation and possible interference with records. Those decisions belong to investigators and prosecutors, not the bank. Annie accepted the answer. Thank you for explaining. Callahan looked at Jonathan. Your security team preserved the dispatch call. The language is clear. She reported an attempted robbery and possible weapon after being told neither had occurred. Jonathan glanced toward the consultation room. Then the record will speak. It will speak better if people do not exaggerate at first. I understand. Callahan studied him for a moment, perhaps deciding whether a billionaire was capable of accepting instruction. Good. Across the lobby, Mrs. Parker finished signing her witness statement. Before leaving, she stopped beside Annie. You handled yourself well today. Annie gave a small nod. I was scared. Those things can both be true. Mrs. Parker placed a business card on the counter. It identified her as Evelyn Parker, retired Superior Court judge. If anyone pressures you about your statement, call the number on the back. You don't have to do that. I know. Annie turned the card over. A personal phone number had been written in blue ink. Mrs. Parker looked at Jonathan. Your daughter has better judgment than several executives I have met. Jonathan glanced at Richard. I am beginning to understand that. Richard did not respond. Maria came from the break room carrying her purse. Am I allowed to go home? Dana answered. Yes. Your devices are not being seized, but do not delete messages or files. Outside counsel will contact you tomorrow. Maria nodded. My grandchildren are waiting. Annie walked with her toward the entrance. Are you worried? About my job? My pension? Whether everyone in this city will know I stayed quiet? Maria gave a tired smile. Pick one. You told the truth. After 17 years, Annie looked through the doors at the cameras. Some people never do. Maria studied her face. That is generous. It isn't forgiveness. I know. The honesty seemed to comfort Maria more than easy reassurance would have. She touched Annie lightly on the shoulder. Happy birthday, sweetheart. I am sorry this is the day you got. Annie's expression softened. Thank you. After Maria left, Jonathan checked the time. We should go home. Annie looked toward the branch employees still being interviewed. You said the board meets tonight. At 8. Will you be there? Yes. Then I want to come. Jonathan shook his head. No. Her eyes narrowed. Why? Because you have spent the entire day defending your right to be treated as a person. I will not place you in a boardroom where executives discuss you as risk, liability, or public relations. They will discuss me whether I am there or not. That does not mean you should have to hear it. Annie looked at him for several seconds. You are doing it again. Doing what? Deciding what protects me without asking what I need. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. She was right, and the speed of his mistake embarrassed him. What do you need? To know what they are saying. Not every detail. But I don't want to go home while men in suits decide whether telling the truth was too expensive. Jonathan considered the conflict. As chairman, he understood why Annie should not attend a closed board session involving pending investigations. As her father, he understood why excluding her would feel like another version of being sent outside. You cannot attend the full meeting, he said. There are privileged legal matters and employee records. Annie's jaw tightened. But you can give a statement before the closed session begins. In person or by video. Your choice. She relaxed slightly. In person. All right. Richard had overheard. The board chair may object. Jonathan turned toward him. She can object to me. Richard looked at Annie. They are worried about market value. So was Victoria, Annie replied. She just called it customer value. At 7:30, they left the branch through the front entrance. Reporters shouted questions from behind a police barrier. Mr. Whitmore, are you firing the branch director? Annie, do you believe the bank is racist? Did you use your daughter's account to test employees? Jonathan kept one hand near Annie's back without pushing her forward. Security offered to surround them, but Annie asked them not to. At the curb, she stopped. Jonathan looked at her. You do not have to answer. I know. She faced the cameras. I went into that bank to activate a scholarship account. I brought valid documents, and I was treated like a criminal before anyone checked them. What happened matters because my father owns the bank, but it matters more because most people treated that way do not have a father who can walk in and change the room. She did not wait for another question. Jonathan opened the passenger door of the old Jeep. Annie climbed inside, and the cameras followed the vehicle until it turned onto the main road. At 8 o'clock, the board would ask how much truth the institution could afford. Jonathan already knew his answer. The greater cost had always belonged to the people forced to live with its silence. The boardroom occupied the 32nd floor of Whitmore Financial Group's headquarters, overlooking downtown Charlotte. By the time Jonathan and Annie arrived, every seat around the long walnut table was filled. 12 directors sat beneath recessed lights with tablets, printed reports, and untouched glasses of water arranged in front of them. Margaret Ellis, the board chair, stood near the windows. She was 62, silver-haired, and known for never wasting a word. Jonathan, she said. Then she looked at Annie. Miss Carter, Whitmore. Annie is fine, Annie replied. Margaret nodded once. Thank you for coming. No one mentioned her birthday. Jonathan noticed that several directors avoided looking directly at her. They had spent the previous hour discussing exposure, stock value, regulatory risk, employee morale, and potential litigation. Annie had entered the room as the person whose experience created those categories. Margaret gestured toward an empty chair at the end of the table. You may sit there. This portion of the meeting will be recorded. After your statement, we will move into a closed session. Annie sat. Jonathan took the chair beside her, but did not touch the microphone. Margaret began. Annie, we understand this has been a difficult day. We are sorry for what occurred. Annie looked around the room. What exactly are you sorry for? A director near the center shifted in his seat. Margaret answered carefully. That a valid customer was treated in a manner inconsistent with the bank's standards. That sounds like something written for the press. It is not intended to. Then say what happened. Margaret held her gaze. You were judged before your documents were examined. You were accused without evidence, humiliated in public, and placed at risk by a false call to police. Annie nodded. Thank you. The room settled. Margaret invited her to speak. Annie placed the black card on the table. This is what started it, she said. Miss Langford saw this card in my hand and decided I could not own it. She did not scan the code. She did not call the trust department. She did not read the note attached to my appointment. One of the directors, Thomas Reed leaned forward. No one disputes that the manager failed to follow procedure. Annie looked at him. She did not fail to follow it. She refused to follow it. Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it. Annie continued. That matters because calling it a mistake makes it sound accidental. She looked at my skin, my clothes, and my shoes, then chose not to believe the record in front of her. Another director asked, "Did she make an explicit racial statement?" Jonathan turned toward him, but Annie answered first. "She said the color of my skin was enough for her to know I did not belong in that room. Does that meet your definition?" The director lowered his eyes. "Yes. She also sent people outside based on what she called presentation. Your own employees confirmed it." Margaret glanced at a preliminary summary from the branch auditors. "We have received that information. Then please do not describe this as one employee losing her temper." No one interrupted. Annie rested both hands on the table. "I know my father owns the bank. I know that is why everyone acted quickly after they learned who he was. But before Mr. Hale entered, I was only an 18-year-old black girl with a scholarship folder. That is the version of me your system decided was not worth checking." Thomas said, "Your father's ownership creates complications for the investigation." "I agree." The answer surprised him. Annie went on, "He should not control the findings. I should not control them either. But that cannot become an excuse to ignore what happened." Margaret asked, "What outcome do you want?" Annie took a moment. "I want everyone affected by that branch to be contacted. I want complaints reviewed by people who do not report to the managers being accused. I want employees protected when they speak. I want the people who paid unfair fees to get their money back." "And Miss Langford?" Margaret asked. "I want the evidence to decide what happens to her." Jonathan looked at Annie. She did not ask for revenge, though Victoria had given her reason to. Margaret asked one final question. "Do you believe Heritage Crown Bank can repair this?" Annie looked toward the windows. Below them, the city moved through evening traffic, each car carrying people who would never enter a boardroom like this one. "I think repair begins when the bank stops asking whether the truth is affordable." Margaret nodded slowly. "Thank you." Annie stood, but Thomas spoke again. "One concern. Your statement to the press may expose the company to further liability." Jonathan felt Annie's body stiffen. She turned back. "My statement did not create the liability." "No, but public language can influence claims. So can public silence." Thomas looked toward Jonathan. "This is precisely why family involvement is dangerous." Annie answered before her father could. "My father did not tell me what to say. I'm not suggesting he did. You are suggesting my voice is dangerous because it cannot be controlled. That is not what I meant. It is what I heard." Margaret intervened. "Thomas, that is enough." Annie picked up the black card. Before leaving, she looked at the directors. "Please remember that while you discuss protecting this bank, there are people who spent years believing they had done something wrong because your employees treated them like suspects. Protect them too." She walked out. Jonathan remained beside the door until it closed behind her. Margaret waited several seconds. "You may escort her home before the closed session." "No, she asked me to stay." Jonathan returned to his chair. Thomas folded his hands. "Then we need to discuss whether you should participate at all." "I should not participate in findings related to Annie's complaint, or any disciplinary recommendation arising from it." "I agree." Margaret looked at him. "You are willing to recuse yourself from the independent investigation and final employment decisions?" "Yes." "Not from ordering evidence preservation or protecting witnesses." The general counsel, Evelyn Shaw, adjusted her glasses. "That is defensible. Immediate protective action is different from adjudicating the case." Another director asked, "What about Richard Hale?" "He remains suspended," Jonathan said. "His signature appears on reports that identified the pattern." Thomas shook his head. "A signature on a quarterly report does not prove knowledge." "No," Jonathan replied. "That is why there will be an investigation." Margaret opened a folder. "We have 3 firms capable of leading it. One specializes in banking compliance, one in employment law, and one in civil rights investigations." "Hire all 3, Jonathan said. The chief financial officer frowned. "That will be expensive." So was ignoring the complaints. The chief financial officer pushed a market forecast across the table. "If this becomes a regional discrimination case, the bank could face substantial withdrawals, regulatory penalties, and investor losses." Jonathan did not look at the forecast. How much did the bank earn from the review fees under investigation? We do not know yet. Then do not ask me to fear the cost of returning money before calculating what we took. Margaret leaned back. Communications recommends limiting tomorrow's statement to the isolated incident. It was not isolated. We do not yet know the full scope. We know 43 deleted complaint references were found in one afternoon. Silence moved around the table. Thomas said, "The word systemic should not be used without statistical proof." Jonathan nodded. "Agreed, but neither should isolated." Margaret considered both men. "Then we state that evidence suggests broader concerns requiring independent review." The board approved the language. They also approved an external hotline, immediate preservation of 5 years of branch records, temporary removal of local complaint authority, and written protection for employees who cooperated. The vote to suspend Richard passed 10-2. The vote to publish preliminary findings within 30 days passed by a narrower margin. When the meeting ended after midnight, Jonathan found Annie asleep on a sofa outside the boardroom. Her blue folder rested against her chest. The black card remained in her hand. He removed his sweatshirt and placed it over her shoulders. Annie opened her eyes. "Did they listen?" "They heard you." "That wasn't my question." Jonathan sat beside her. "Some listened, some calculated." "Which did you do?" He looked through the glass wall at the empty boardroom. "Both." Annie nodded. "At least that's honest." Jonathan glanced at the sealed letter still inside his backpack. Claire had meant for Annie to read it on a quiet birthday evening, not beneath corporate lights after midnight. "We can go home now," he said. Annie stood and handed him the sweatshirt. As they entered the elevator, Jonathan's phone vibrated. Dana Foster had sent a new message. The recovered complaint files now numbered 68. One included evidence that Victoria had charged unauthorized review fees to minority-owned businesses for more than 4 years. Jonathan showed the message to Annie. She read it twice. "This is bigger than the way she treated me." "Yes." The elevator descended toward the lobby. Annie held the black card at her side. "Then tomorrow, we stop making it about me." By 7 the next morning, Annie's name was already trending beside the bank's. Jonathan found her at the kitchen table wearing the same clothes from the night before. She had opened her laptop but had not touched the bowl of oatmeal beside it. Clips from the branch played across the screen, most of them less than 30 seconds long. One showed Jonathan stepping toward Victoria after she had emptied his backpack. Another began with Annie raising her voice but left out the moment Victoria threw the card. A commentator described the incident as a dispute between a billionaire's family and a bank employee enforcing security rules. Annie closed the laptop. They made her the victim. Jonathan poured coffee into an old ceramic mug. They made a version that fits the clip. The full recording exists. Truth is slower than a headline. She looked at him. "That sounds like something people say when they have enough power to survive the headline." He accepted the criticism. "You're right." His phone had not stopped vibrating since dawn. Board members, attorneys, reporters, regulators, and executives all wanted answers. Jonathan had ignored most of them long enough to make breakfast. He placed 2 slices of bread in a skillet and added cheese between them. Annie watched him. "What are you doing?" "Your mother used to make grilled cheese when the day started badly. It's 7 in the morning." She believed grilled cheese was not controlled by the clock. That earned the first faint smile he had seen since they left the bank. Jonathan opened a can of tomato soup and poured it into a small pot. The meal was simple, familiar, and tied to a kitchen that no longer existed. Claire had often cooked it when bills were late, when medical appointments went badly, or when Jonathan came home convinced he had failed everyone. Annie looked toward the backpack on the counter. Claire's sealed letter remained inside. "You were going to give me that yesterday." "Yes." "Did she write it before she died?" "Years before." "Have you read it?" "No." Annie lowered her eyes. "Not yet. You decide when." His phone rang again. This time the caller was Margaret Ellis. Jonathan answered on speaker. "The statement went out at 6:30, Margaret said. "The outside hotline is active. We have already received 27 calls." "From customers?" "Customers and former employees." Annie looked up. Margaret continued. "Victoria's attorney released a statement 20 minutes ago. She claims she followed anti-fraud training and was retaliated against after refusing special treatment to the chairman's daughter." Jonathan turned off the stove. "Did she mention the valid appointment?" "No." "The recorded slurs?" "No." "The false robbery report?" "She says she perceived a threat." Annie let out a quiet breath. "Of course she does. Margaret paused. There is more. Her attorney says the incident may have been staged to justify leadership changes at the bank. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Do not respond emotionally. Margaret said, I am not emotional. You stopped moving. Annie glanced at him. Margaret knew him well. Jonathan turned the burner back on. The bank will not argue through the press. Release the verified timeline and direct all questions to outside counsel. That is already being prepared. Include the trust department confirmation. Legal is reviewing it. Good. Margaret lowered her voice. Jonathan, this may become worse before it becomes clearer. It was already worse for the people nobody believed. He ended the call. Annie opened her laptop again. Comments continued appearing beneath her statement outside the bank. Some praised her courage. Others accused her of pretending to be ordinary while holding a billionaire's card. One person wrote that a real scholarship student would never have access to private banking. Another asked why she wore inexpensive shoes if her father was wealthy. Annie read the words silently. Jonathan placed a plate in front of her. Do not let strangers decide what you meant. They are not deciding what I meant. They are deciding what kind of person I am. They do not know you. That has never stopped anyone. He sat across from her. Do you want the communications team to protect your identity? It is too late. We can ask outlets not to use your photograph. They already have it. We can issue a statement about the scholarship. Annie looked at him. Then they will say I needed my father's company to prove I earned it. Jonathan had no immediate answer. She picked up half the sandwich but did not eat. Yesterday, I was not believable because I looked poor. Today, I am not believable because you are rich. That is not your contradiction. It still becomes my burden. Jonathan leaned back. For years, he had solved problems by finding the correct lever. Money, counsel, influence, time. Annie was showing him a wound with no lever. What do you need from me? He asked. Not a statement, not a lawyer. Just let me finish being angry before you turn it into a plan. Jonathan nodded. All right. They ate in silence for several minutes. At 9, Dana Foster called with preliminary findings. The recovery team had reconstructed 68 complaint references and 31 complete files. 14 involved unexplained fee increases. 9 involved security being called before any suspicious conduct. 11 customers had been directed to the outdoor window despite open seats inside. One former employee reported being ordered to delete a complaint from Leonard Hayes. Another said Victoria instructed staff to identify visual disruptions in the private lounge. Dana added, We have also found irregularities in fee reversals. Some charges appear to have been removed for wealthy clients, while remaining on similar accounts held by minority-owned businesses. Jonathan asked, How far back? 4 years so far. Preserve everything. We are. Annie leaned toward the phone. Has anyone contacted Leonard Hayes? Not yet. His number is no longer current. I know where his store is. Jonathan looked at her. Dana replied, Annie, witnesses should be contacted through the investigators. I understand. I am not asking to interview him. I want to tell him the hotline exists. Jonathan considered the risk. Only if counsel approves, and you do not discuss evidence. Annie nodded. Fine. After the call, she took Claire's letter from the backpack and held it for a moment. Then she put it back. Not yet, she said. Jonathan did not ask why. By noon, the bank's stock had fallen 6%. 2 major investors demanded a private briefing. 3 television networks requested interviews. Richard Hale's attorney warned that his client had been made a scapegoat. The pressure arrived exactly as Jonathan expected. First as concern, then as advice, then as fear disguised as responsibility. At 1 o'clock, Margaret called again. Several directors want to delay the preliminary report. For what reason? They say releasing incomplete findings could damage innocent employees. Jonathan looked at Annie, who was writing Leonard Hayes' store address on a notepad. Then remove employee names until findings are confirmed. Do not delay the pattern. Margaret sighed. You know what they are really afraid of? Yes. The cost. Jonathan watched Annie fold the paper and place it in her pocket. Justice becomes expensive right before people decide silence is cheaper. The words came from Claire. She had said them years earlier during one of Jonathan's first lending battles. Annie looked up. Mom said that? Yes. She was right. Jonathan glanced toward the sealed letter. By afternoon, the investigators would begin calling people whose complaints had been deleted. By evening, the The bank would know whether the scandal belonged to one branch or to something larger. For the first time since entering Heritage Crown, Annie no longer cared whether the public believed her personally. She wanted the names beneath hers to be heard. The investigators reached Leonard Hayes before Annie did. By mid-afternoon, Dana Foster called to say Leonard had refused to discuss his complaint over the phone. He had listened long enough to hear the name Heritage Crown Bank, then ended the call. He said the bank had enough chances, Dana explained. Annie stood near the kitchen counter with Leonard's store address folded in her hand. Did you tell him the investigation is independent? Yes. He said the last people who called themselves independent still worked for the bank. Jonathan understood the distrust. Do not pressure him. I won't, Annie said. But I want to go see him. Dana hesitated. That creates a risk. You are a central witness. I am not going to ask about his case. I only want to tell him why his name came up and let him decide. Jonathan watched her. You should not go alone. Annie expected him to offer a driver, an attorney, or a security team. Instead, he said, Maria should come with you. Leonard knows her, and she can confirm that the complaint existed. Annie nodded. That makes sense. An hour later, Maria pulled into the driveway in a 10-year-old Toyota Corolla. She had changed out of her bank uniform and wore jeans with a blue cotton blouse. Without her name badge and teller jacket, she looked less like a bank employee and more like what she was, a tired grandmother who had spent the night wondering whether telling the truth had come too late. Jonathan walked Annie to the car. You do not promise compensation, he said. You do not discuss documents. You do not ask him to testify. I know. If he says no, you leave. I know. He paused. Annie looked at him. You're doing better. At what? Asking instead of ordering. I still gave you 3 instructions. You used to give 10. Maria smiled from the driver's seat. Leonard Hayes Hardware stood on Beatty's Ford Road between a barber shop and a family-owned restaurant. A faded red awning shaded the front windows. Inside, shelves held plumbing fittings, boxes of nails, paintbrushes, work gloves, and tools arranged by someone who knew exactly where everything belonged. Photographs covered one wall. Youth baseball teams. Church food drives. High school students receiving trade school scholarships. A framed newspaper clipping showed Leonard donating lumber after a neighborhood fire. Annie understood at once why the business mattered. It was more than a store. It was part of the community's memory. Leonard stood behind the counter helping an older man choose a replacement valve. He was broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck. When the customer left, Leonard looked at Maria. I wondered how long it would take before the bank sent someone I recognized. Maria stopped several feet from the counter. They did not send me. He looked at Annie. But I know who sent her. No one sent me, Annie said. Leonard gave a dry laugh. The chairman's daughter walks into my store the day after the story breaks, and I am supposed to believe it is a coincidence? No, sir. It is not a coincidence. He waited, Annie continued. I saw your name on a branch document. I remembered hearing you speak at a youth business workshop last year. Leonard's expression shifted slightly. You were there? You told us never to borrow money without reading how the fees could change. I learned that lesson the expensive way. Maria lowered her eyes. Leonard noticed. You scanned my complaint. Yes. And then it disappeared. Yes. Did you delete it? No. But I knew it was gone, and I did not call you. That difference probably matters to you. It does. Maria's voice tightened. It may not matter to you. Leonard studied her for a long moment. At least that answer is honest. Annie placed a card on the counter. It contained the number for the independent reporting line. You do not owe the bank a statement. You do not owe my father anything. I only wanted you to know that the complaint was recovered from a backup system. Leonard looked at the card but did not touch it. Recovered after the owner's daughter was mistreated. Yes, sir. And before that? No one looked hard enough. That is a polite way to say no one cared. Annie did not defend the bank. Yes. The direct answer seemed to unsettle him more than an excuse would have. Leonard walked to a small office behind the counter and returned carrying a thick brown envelope. He placed it beside the hotline card. My wife kept copies. Inside were 6 pages of the original complaint, account statements, fee notices, and correspondence from the branch. Leonard tapped one document. They charged me $4,800 for an enhanced business review. My company had never missed a payment in 31 years. Maria said quietly, I remember. I asked why the fee was so high. Miss Langford said businesses from my area required more work. Annie looked around the store. What happened after you paid it? I delayed replacing a delivery truck. Then the old one broke down, and I lost 2 contracts. He pointed toward the wall of photographs. I had to let 2 young men go. One of them had just become a father. His voice remained controlled, but anger lived beneath each word. The bank later told me the fee had been explained and accepted. I never accepted it. I paid because they froze my credit request until I did. Annie thought about the way Victoria had called customers low value. Leonard's store had supported families, sponsored children, and remained open through recessions. Yet a spreadsheet had reduced it to a risk code. Mr. Hayes, the investigators found other complaints, she said. Some involved similar fees. How many? They have not finished counting. He looked at Maria. Were white business owners charged the same way? Maria answered carefully. Not from what I saw. Leonard removed his glasses. That is the first straight answer anyone from that bank has given me. I should have given it sooner, Maria said. Yes, you should have. She accepted the words without argument. Leonard picked up the hotline card. If I call, who hears me? Outside investigators, Annie said. Not branch management, not Mr. Hale, not my father. And if the bank does not like what I say, they still have to preserve it. That is not the same as acting on it. No, sir, it isn't. He looked at her. You do not promise much. I do not want to use promises to get your story. Leonard's expression softened by a degree. He placed the brown envelope in Annie's direction, then pulled it back. No, this goes directly to the investigators. Chain of custody matters. Maria almost smiled. You have been reading. I learned after trusting experts cost me $5,000. He picked up the store phone and dialed the number on the card. Annie and Maria remained silent while he identified himself. This is Leonard Hayes, he said. I filed a complaint last spring. I still have every page. Back at headquarters, the data team continued comparing fee overrides, security alerts, and complaint closures across 5 years. By evening, a pattern had emerged that no one could explain as coincidence. Black-owned businesses at Victoria's branch had been charged enhanced review fees at more than 3 times the rate of comparable white-owned businesses. Latino customers faced higher document processing charges. Wealthy clients received quiet reversals when they objected. Working-class customers were told the fees were mandatory. Jonathan read the findings alone in his office. Behind his desk hung a framed copy of Heritage Crown Bank's mission statement. He had approved every word after the acquisition. Fair access, responsible service, community trust. He looked at the numbers again. The institution had learned to speak his values while practicing Victoria's. His phone rang. Dana said, Leonard Hayes agreed to a formal interview. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. Good. There is more. We found an email from Victoria to Richard Hale. She described the enhanced fees as a way to offset what she called high-maintenance community accounts. Did Richard respond? Yes. Jonathan waited. Dana read the reply. Use discretion. Keep complaints local. Jonathan looked through the office windows at the city below. Victoria had built the machinery. Richard had heard it running and decided the noise was profitable. The next phase of the investigation would no longer ask whether the bank had failed. It would ask how many people had helped the failure continue. 6 weeks later, the special accountability hearing began inside Heritage Crown Bank's headquarters in Charlotte. The long hearing room had no marble floors, no leather lounge chairs, and no brass slogans on the wall. There were only plain tables, microphones, water pitchers, and rows of people waiting to speak. Jonathan sat at the board table but not at its center. An independent committee chair, retired federal judge Helen Morris, presided over the proceeding. State banking officials, federal compliance observers, outside investigators, employee representatives, and several affected customers filled the room. A limited number of reporters sat in the back. Victoria Langford entered with her attorney shortly before 9. She wore a dark suit and carried no handbag. Without the private office, the title, and the employees who once hurried to obey her, she looked smaller. Richard Hale arrived separately. He did not look toward Jonathan. Annie sat in the first row beside Maria and Leonard Hayes. The black card rested inside her blue folder. She had considered leaving it at home, but decided the hearing should see the object Victoria had believed mattered more than the person holding it. Judge Morris opened the session. This is not a criminal trial, she said. The purpose is to review the independent findings, hear relevant testimony, and determine the bank's institutional response. Any criminal matters remain with law enforcement and prosecutors. Victoria's attorney rose first. My client denies that race motivated her actions. She was responsible for protecting a high-value financial institution from fraud. The account presented by Miss Carter Whitmore was unusual, and the circumstances justified caution. The lead investigator, Sandra Lee, looked down at her notes. Caution is not under review, she said. Selective procedure is. Victoria's attorney continued. The bank rewarded Miss Langford for aggressive risk management and strong revenue. If the institution now objects to her methods, it must acknowledge that those methods developed under unclear guidance. Jonathan watched Richard shift in his chair. The argument contained enough truth to be dangerous. Victoria had not created the entire culture alone. Profit had protected her. Silence had widened her authority. Managers above her had accepted results without asking how they were produced. But the evidence also showed choice. Sandra began with Annie's appointment record. The screen displayed the scheduled time, trust department note, verification code, and internal authorization. Miss Langford, Sandra asked, was this information available when Annie arrived? Victoria leaned toward the microphone. There were signs that the account may have been compromised. What signs? The card level did not match the customer profile. What part of the profile? Victoria paused. Her age, her clothing, the absence of a private banker. Sandra displayed the appointment note. It states that the client would arrive alone. I did not trust the note. Did you call the trust department? No. Did you use the secure internal directory? No. Did you scan the verification code? No. Then what investigation did you perform before accusing her of forgery? Victoria looked at her attorney. He said, my client has answered. Sandra turned toward the screen. The lobby footage began. Annie watched herself enter with the blue folder against her chest. She heard her own polite greeting. She saw Victoria take the card, dismiss the documents, and point toward the outside window. No one in the hearing room moved when the card struck the floor. The video continued through Jonathan's arrival, the security call, the backpack search, and Victoria's false robbery report. Claire's letter slid across the marble. The family photograph landed face down. Jonathan kept his eyes on the screen. Annie reached across the narrow space between their chairs and placed her hand over his. When the recording ended, Judge Morris allowed several seconds of silence before calling Maria. Maria walked to the witness table carrying a small notebook. She described the P, R, O, and S codes. She explained how Victoria told employees to protect the appearance of the private lounge. She admitted that she had followed instructions she knew were wrong. Victoria's attorney stood. Mrs. Delgado, you remained employed under Miss Langford for 17 years, correct? Yes. You accepted promotions and salary increases? Yes. You never contacted law enforcement? No. Is it possible your testimony is influenced by guilt over your own participation? Maria looked at him. My guilt is why I am not asking anyone to call me brave. It is not why the emails exist. A few people in the audience lowered their eyes. Samuel testified next. He explained that security officers were often called before customers displayed suspicious behavior. Why did you comply? Sandra asked. Because the branch director said there was a risk. When did you begin questioning the pattern? When I realized the same kinds of people kept becoming risks before they spoke. Leonard Hayes took the witness chair after lunch. He placed his 6-page complaint and fee notice on the table. My hardware store had never missed a loan payment in 31 years, he said. The bank charged me $4,800 for an enhanced review and froze my credit request until I paid. Victoria's attorney asked whether Leonard could prove the fee was based on race. Leonard answered, I can prove white businesses with weaker records were not charged the same fee. The investigators can explain the numbers. I can explain what it cost me. He described the broken delivery truck, the lost contracts, and the 2 employees he had to release. One of those young men had a newborn, Leonard said. You people call that a fee. In my neighborhood, it was 2 families losing income. Richard was called late in the afternoon. Sandra displayed the quarterly reports bearing his electronic approval. You received warnings about complaint closures, security interventions, and fee disparities? Yes. Did you order an independent review? No. Did you speak with affected customers? No. Did you visit the outdoor service window? No. Why not? Richard looked toward Jonathan, then away. The branch was profitable. Miss Langford explained the numbers as local fraud pressure and customer misunderstanding. Sandra displayed his email. Use discretion. Keep complaints local. What did that mean? I meant resolve them at the branch level. By the person accused in the complaints? Richard closed his eyes briefly. Yes. Jonathan had been permitted one question. He leaned toward his microphone. When did not knowing become more convenient than finding out? Richard's face tightened. For several seconds, the room waited. When the numbers stayed good, he said, the admission ended the illusion that Victoria alone had caused the harm. Annie was the final witness. She carried the blue folder to the table and placed the black card beside the microphone. I earned my scholarship, she began. I completed the application, wrote the essays, maintained my grades, and worked after school. I went to the bank alone because I thought adulthood meant handling my own responsibilities. Victoria looked down. Annie continued. The deepest injury was not that Miss Langford refused a transaction. It was that she decided my documents became less believable because of the way I looked. Victoria's attorney asked, would this investigation have received the same attention if your father did not own the bank? No, Annie said. The direct answer moved through the room. She continued before he could use it. My father's power forced the bank to pay attention. That is not a defense of the institution. It is evidence against it. The attorney sat down. Victoria asked to speak. Her voice was softer than Annie remembered. I am sorry. Had I understood who you were, I would never have treated you that way. Annie picked up the black card. That is why your apology means nothing. Victoria looked at her. I was not deserving because he adopted me. I was not honest because his name was connected to my account. I was deserving when I walked through those doors alone. She held the card where Victoria could see it. You did not reject a billionaire's daughter. You rejected the kind of girl you believed no billionaire would ever love. No one spoke. The board later received a recommendation to settle privately, delay the public report, and protect the bank's market value. Jonathan read the proposal once. Then he set it aside. Justice is not fair when it arrives only after power introduces itself, he said. Release the findings. The vote passed. The next morning, Heritage Crown Bank would no longer control which parts of the truth the public was allowed to see. The report was released at 8 the next morning. By 8:15, every major financial network had posted the same headline: Heritage Crown Bank admits discriminatory practices at Charlotte flagship branch. The public statement did not describe the incident as a misunderstanding. It acknowledged that Annie had arrived with valid documents, that employees refused available verification, that police were called on unsupported allegations, and that previous complaints had been mishandled or erased. It also named the larger failure. Branch leadership had created an unauthorized system that treated customers differently according to race, appearance, neighborhood, occupation, and expected profitability. Regional management had received warning signs and failed to act. Jonathan stood behind a podium in the headquarters media room with Judge Helen Morris, Sandra Lee, and 2 members of the independent committee. Annie sat with Maria and Leonard in the second row. Jonathan had refused to stand alone. He did not want the image of one billionaire promising to fix everything. That would repeat the same mistake the bank had made for years, placing too much authority in one person and calling it accountability. The findings released today are painful, Jonathan began. They should be. Cameras clicked across the room. This institution failed customers who trusted us with their paychecks, retirement savings, businesses, and family plans. It failed employees who reported misconduct. It failed people who were taught to blame themselves for treatment that was neither fair nor accidental. A reporter raised her hand. Chairman Whitmore, do you accept personal responsibility? Yes. You did not create the customer filtering policy. No. But leadership cannot claim credit for profits and then claim distance from the harm used to produce them. Annie watched several executives lower their eyes. Another reporter asked whether Jonathan would compensate his own daughter. Jonathan looked toward Annie before answering. Annie has not requested compensation. Her personal legal rights are separate from the bank's restitution process, and I will not decide them. Do you believe the institution is racist? I believe the evidence shows discriminatory conduct was allowed to become part of daily business. Labels matter less than whether we are willing to correct the structure that protected it. The answer did not fit neatly into a headline, which was why Jonathan preferred it. After the press conference, The board announced Victoria Langford's permanent termination. Her system access had already been disabled, but the independent findings now provided formal grounds: discriminatory conduct, falsification of records, retaliation against employees, unauthorized fee practices, misuse of security procedures, and attempted deletion of evidence. Richard Hale resigned before the board completed its final vote. He requested a private meeting with Jonathan that afternoon. They met in a small conference room rather than Jonathan's office. Richard looked older than he had 6 weeks earlier. His suit fit the same, but his posture had changed. "I never thought of myself as prejudiced," Richard said. Jonathan remained silent. Richard continued, "I did not use those codes. I did not send customers outside. I did not tell Victoria to target black businesses. You told her to keep complaints local. I meant for her to resolve them. You knew she was the person being accused." Richard looked down. "I trusted her judgment." "No. You trusted her results." Richard rubbed his thumb along the edge of the table. "Does one failure erase 28 years of service?" Jonathan leaned back. "It was not one failure. It was every quarter you signed a report without asking why the same people kept becoming problems. I was responsible for 53 branches, and the customers were responsible for one account each. That account may have held everything they had." Richard closed his eyes. Jonathan did not enjoy the man's defeat. Richard had once been competent, loyal, and respected. That was what made the betrayal harder to dismiss. Institutions rarely collapsed because every person inside them was openly cruel. They collapsed because capable people learned to look away at the right time. Richard stood. "What happens to my retirement?" "The board compensation committee will decide according to your contract and the investigation findings." "You could protect it?" "Yes." "Will you?" "No." Richard nodded slowly, as if he had expected the answer but needed to hear it. Before leaving, he said, "I am sorry about Annie." Jonathan looked at him. "Are you sorry she was hurt, or sorry she was someone whose father could expose it?" Richard had no answer. The regulatory process moved more slowly. State licensing authorities opened a formal review of Victoria's conduct. Federal banking regulators examined fee practices, complaint procedures, and fair access violations. The district attorney reviewed the false robbery report and the attempted deletion of surveillance records. Months later, Victoria lost every professional license connected to regulated banking work. Prosecutors charged her with filing a false police report, falsifying business records, and attempted evidence destruction. Additional financial charges remained under review. There was no dramatic sentence delivered overnight. The process required hearings, motions, records, and witness statements. Annie learned that justice moved more slowly outside the bank lobby, but slowness did not mean silence. The Customer Compensation Fund opened under an external administrator. No claimant had to sign a broad confidentiality agreement. Each case was reviewed according to records, fees, lost opportunities, and documented harm. Leonard Hayes received reimbursement for the $4,800 review fee, interest, and part of the business loss caused by the delayed credit line. When a bank representative offered to arrange a public ceremony, Leonard declined. "I do not need a photograph of you returning what should never have been taken," he said. He accepted the corrected account records and a new credit review supervised by an independent officer. Dorothy Mills received a written apology and reimbursement for several improper service charges. The bank also paid for transportation she had needed after being denied indoor assistance during extreme weather. Tasha Green's complaint was reopened. The bank corrected the internal note that had described her as disruptive and compensated her for the payroll delay. Maria returned to work with full benefits. The board offered her a branch management position, but she declined. "I spent 17 years learning how silence works," she told Annie. "I should not become a manager just because I finally stopped using it." Instead, she accepted a customer advocacy role. She helped older clients complete complaint forms and trained employees to recognize retaliation. Samuel remained head of security after the review confirmed that he refused to conduct an unlawful search or handcuff Jonathan and Annie. Still, he requested community meetings with customers who had been placed under unnecessary observation. At the first meeting, a black pastor asked him why he had obeyed earlier alerts without questioning them. Samuel answered, "Because the order came from someone with a title, and I confused authority with evidence." The pastor nodded. "What changed?" "I saw an 18-year-old girl remain calmer than the adults accusing her. The flagship branch closed for 2 weeks. When it reopened, the outdoor service window was gone. Workers removed part of the interior wall and turned the space into a small financial education center with chairs, water, and printed explanations of customer rights. Heritage Crown created an independent complaint office that no branch manager could control. Enhanced identity checks required written reasons. Manual fee changes triggered review. Security patterns were tested for racial disparities. Whistleblower reports went directly to the board compliance committee. Some directors wanted to celebrate the reforms. Jonathan refused. "You do not celebrate repairing a door after people were locked outside," he said. "You keep checking whether it stays open." On reopening day, Leonard entered carrying the morning deposit from his hardware store. No reporters followed him. No executive waited near the door. A young teller verified the amount, handed him a receipt, and said, "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Is there anything else I can help you with?" Leonard looked around the lobby. The same marble floor remained. The same glass doors. The same brass words on the wall. But no one asked him to prove that he belonged. "No," he said. "That will be all." He left without applause. For Jonathan, that ordinary departure mattered more than the press conference. Justice had begun to look less like punishment and more like a man finishing a bank transaction without being made to feel small. Several weeks after the branch reopened, Jonathan asked Annie whether she was ready to finish celebrating her 18th birthday. She looked at him across the breakfast table. "Finish? We never got past the bank. I remember. I bought cake. You bought cake 6 weeks late? It is still technically for your 18th birthday." Annie narrowed her eyes. "What kind? Chocolate? With white frosting?" "Yes." She tried not to smile. "Then I suppose we can continue." They chose a quiet Sunday afternoon at home. No executives, attorneys, reporters, or board members were invited. Jonathan lit the grill on the back patio while Annie prepared potato salad from Claire's handwritten recipe. She added too much mustard, tasted it, and frowned. Jonathan glanced over. "I can fix that." "No. It needs more potatoes." I said no. "You know I am right. You are not taking over my potato salad." Jonathan raised both hands and returned to the grill. "I have learned nothing. You have learned enough to step away from the bowl." They ate hamburgers, corn on the cob, potato salad that was sharper than Claire's had ever been, and iced tea from heavy glasses Jonathan had owned since his first apartment. The meal felt ordinary, which was what Annie wanted. For weeks, strangers had discussed her on television as though she were a symbol instead of a person. Some called her brave, others called her privileged. Few seemed interested in the fact that she still had college forms to complete, laundry to fold, and an unopened letter from a woman she missed. After lunch, Jonathan carried a leather folder onto the patio and placed it between them. Annie looked at it. "The trust." "Yes. I thought the account was only for the scholarship. The scholarship is separate. This is what I planned to explain on your birthday." She did not open the folder. "How much?" "Enough to give you choices, not enough to remove consequences." "That sounds like a sentence you practiced." "I had 6 weeks." Annie opened the folder and read the summary. The trust included her education costs, a protected investment account, and a smaller portion she could direct after turning 18. Major withdrawals required independent financial advice. The account gave her security, not unrestricted access to Jonathan's corporate wealth. Even so, the amount made her sit back. "This is too much. It is responsibility. It is still too much." Jonathan rested his forearms on the table. "Money frightened me for most of my life. First, because I did not have it. Then because I was afraid of becoming the kind of man who believed having it made him wiser than everyone else." Annie looked at the papers again. When Claire was sick, every decision had a price attached. Medicine, travel, specialists, time away from work. After she died, I promised myself I would never allow someone I loved to stand beside a hospital bed wondering whether money had decided the outcome. That is not the same as giving me a trust. No, but grief is not always reasonable. The honesty quieted her. Jonathan continued. "I do not want this money to define you. I also do not want pretending it does not exist to become another kind of dishonesty." Annie closed the folder. "I spent years trying to prove I deserved to be your daughter without it." Jonathan's expression changed. "Why would you think you had to prove that? You chose me. I chose the legal responsibility. I did not choose whether I loved you." She looked away. Jonathan waited. Annie said, "People hear adopted daughter and billionaire in the same sentence. They assume I was rescued. You survived before I adopted you. I know. You earned your scholarship. I know. You never had to earn your place with me. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. Jonathan nodded toward the old backpack near the patio door. Claire's letter is still inside. Annie was quiet for several seconds, then stood and retrieved it. The envelope had softened at the edges after years of storage. Claire had written Annie's name in blue ink. Annie ran her thumb beneath the letters before breaking the seal. Jonathan looked toward the yard while she read. He had promised Claire he would never open it, and he kept that promise even after grief made him curious. Annie read silently at first. Then she stopped. What did she say? Jonathan asked. She said strong girls are often praised for needing very little. Jonathan looked at her. Annie continued reading aloud. She wrote, "People may admire your courage and forget that courage can be lonely. Never let anyone make you prove your humanity before they offer kindness." Jonathan lowered his eyes. Annie turned the page. "She also wrote about you. That concerns me. She said you mistake responsibility for love because responsibility is easier for you to measure." Jonathan let out one short laugh. "That sounds like Claire. She told me that when I was old enough, I should remind you that people are not problems to solve." He looked toward the grill. "She planned to continue correcting me after death." "She knew you." Annie's voice broke on the last word. The letter lowered into her lap. For the first time since the bank incident, she stopped trying to control what her face revealed. She cried for Claire, for David, for the mother she barely remembered, for the card on the marble floor, and for every moment she had believed needing help would make her less worthy of the life Jonathan gave her. Jonathan moved his chair beside hers. He did not explain the trust. He did not promise to repair anything. He simply put one arm around her and stayed there. After a while, Annie wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I know what I want to do with part of the money." Jonathan reached for the folder. She held up one finger. "Do not make a plan yet." He stopped. "I want to create something for students who have the grades but not the money. Scholarships, emergency help, financial education, and low-interest credit for young business owners who get treated like Mr. Hayes." Jonathan listened. "I also want legal assistance for people challenging unfair fees," she continued. "Not a giant program run by executives who never meet them. Something local first." "What would you call it?" "The Open Door Scholarship and Credit Initiative." Jonathan nodded. "Why open door?" "Because too many institutions say everyone is welcome while deciding who gets to enter." She explained that applicants should not have to display humiliation to prove need. Students would receive mentors, especially retired teachers, veterans, accountants, and business owners. Young entrepreneurs would receive guidance before loans, not punishment after confusion. Complaints would be reviewed outside the same institution accused of misconduct. Jonathan asked, "How much of the trust do you want to use?" Annie named a figure. It was substantial but measured. Jonathan did not hide his surprise. "You taught me to read before signing. I also taught you to start small. This is small compared with what it could become." He considered the proposal. "I will match it. You will not control it." "I will match it." That was not an answer. "No control. Independent board. You choose the first community advisors." Annie nodded. "Mr. Hayes." "Good." "Maria." "Good." "Mrs. Parker." Jonathan smiled. "She will argue with everyone. That is why I want her." They named the first scholarship after David Carter and the financial rights clinic after Claire. Annie looked at the cracked family photograph on the patio table. Jonathan had replaced the frame but left the original picture inside. The thin line still crossed David's face. "We should get a clean copy," Jonathan said. "No. The glass is damaged. The picture is not." Jonathan understood. Later, while the sun lowered behind the trees, he told Annie about another decision. "I am going to begin visiting branches without advance notice." "Dressed like that?" He looked down at his faded polo shirt. "What is wrong with this?" "Nothing. That is the point." He said the visits would not be theatrical tests. He would stand in ordinary lines, speak with junior employees, review unresolved complaints, and meet customers without regional executives preparing the room. "A report tells me what a branch wants me to know," he said. "A waiting room tells me what it has become." Annie folded Claire's letter and returned it to the envelope. "Do not turn this into another way to control everything." "I will try not to." "Listen first." Jonathan nodded. "Listen first." They carried the dishes inside together. The cake waited on the kitchen counter with 18 candles still in the box. Jonathan began placing them. Annie watched him struggle with the spacing. You built a financial empire, but you cannot arrange candles. Different skill set. When all 18 were lit, Jonathan turned off the kitchen lights. Annie closed her eyes before making the wish. For years, she had believed adulthood meant proving she could carry every burden alone. Now she understood that independence was not refusing every hand offered to her. It was learning which hands respected her enough to help without trying to own the direction of her life. 1 year later, Jonathan returned to the Charlotte flagship branch on another hot August morning. He drove Claire's old dark blue Jeep and parked 2 blocks away. He wore khaki pants, a pale blue button-down shirt, and the same worn running shoes Victoria Langford had once treated as evidence against him. No driver waited at the curb. No executive stood near the entrance. He had informed no one except Annie, who had asked him to meet her for lunch. The glass doors opened without ceremony. The brass words remained on the wall. Dignity, trust, service. A smaller sign now hung beneath them. Trust is not something customers must prove. It is something institutions must earn. Jonathan stopped long enough to read it, though he had approved the wording months earlier. The marble floor looked unchanged. There was no mark where the black card had landed, or where Claire's letter and the cracked family photograph had been scattered. Polished surfaces did not preserve memory. People had to do that. The rest of the branch had changed. The former outdoor service window had been closed and rebuilt as the Claire Whitmore Financial Learning Center. Part of the wall had been removed, so the room opened into the main lobby. Through the wide entrance, Jonathan saw a retired accountant showing 5 high school students how compound interest worked. A whiteboard listed the differences between credit scores, credit reports, and lending decisions. Leonard Hayes stood near the back table speaking to 3 young business owners. A loan officer should be able to explain every fee in plain English, he told them. If they cannot explain it, do not sign because they are wearing a suit and you are not. He looked up and noticed Jonathan. Leonard did not wave or interrupt the session. He simply nodded once. Jonathan returned the gesture. That small exchange pleased him more than public gratitude would have. Leonard was no longer standing inside the bank as an injured customer invited back for display. He was there because his experience had value. At the teller line, Maria Delgado sat beside an elderly woman completing a direct deposit form. Her title was now Customer Advocacy Manager, but she still worked from a desk close to the public area. Take your time, Mrs. Wallace, Maria said. There is no prize for finishing before you understand it. The woman laughed. That is not what my late husband used to say about tax forms. Your husband did not work here. That may explain several things. Jonathan smiled. Maria noticed him only after returning the woman's identification. Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. Good morning, Maria. You could have warned us. That would defeat the purpose. She looked around the lobby. 2 tellers called in sick. The air conditioner made a terrible sound at opening, and someone in commercial services ordered the wrong printer paper. Then I chose an honest day. Maria lowered her voice. We also delayed 1 customer this morning because the identification did not match the account address. Was the delay documented? Yes. The employee explained the reason, offered the customer a chair, and called the account verification team. It took 12 minutes. Did the customer understand? He was annoyed, but he understood. Jonathan nodded. Fair procedure did not mean the absence of questions. It meant questions based on evidence, applied consistently, and explained without humiliation. Near the entrance, Samuel Brooks stood with a younger security officer. What do you notice first? Samuel asked him. The customer's hands. What else? Movement toward restricted areas, signs of panic, attempts to conceal objects. Samuel waited. The younger guard added, behavior, not clothes. Good. Remember that after a quiet month. That is when people get lazy. Samuel saw Jonathan and approached. Sir. Samuel. The quarterly security review found 1 branch still calling officers before documenting suspicious conduct. What happened? The alerts were corrected. The manager received a warning, and compliance is monitoring the branch. Jonathan appreciated the answer because it contained no claim that the system had become perfect. Reform was not a clean ending. It was the work of catching old habits before they became protected again. The front doors opened, and Annie entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. She was 19 now and preparing for her 2nd year at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. where she studied economics and public policy. She wore jeans, a white blouse, and dark flats that were newer than the pair Victoria had mocked, but just as simple. She handed Jonathan one cup. Black, no sugar. You remembered. You have taken coffee the same way since before I could read. The Open Door Scholarship and Credit Initiative had completed its first year. 12 students received scholarships. 6 young minority-owned businesses received low-interest loans and mentorship. Not every result was easy. One student left school to care for an ill parent. One business failed despite careful planning. An applicant used part of an emergency grant for expenses outside the approved agreement. Annie had learned that helping people did not mean controlling every outcome. The program adjusted its rules, listened to the people involved, and continued. Leonard served on the Small Business Advisory Council. Maria taught monthly workshops about bank statements and complaint procedures. Mrs. Parker recruited retired attorneys to volunteer at the Claire Whitmore Financial Rights Clinic. Jonathan had offered additional funding twice. Annie had accepted the money and rejected several of his suggestions. He considered that progress for both of them. "Ready for lunch?" he asked. "Almost. I need to replace my card." Jonathan looked at the dark blue card in her hand. "What happened to the black one?" "It expired. You could have requested another private client card." "I did not want one. You know the color was not responsible." "No, but I do not need the services connected to it. My scholarship account is a student account. The trust is managed separately." She joined the ordinary teller line. Jonathan stood behind her. Several employees recognized them, but no one came to remove them from the line. No branch manager appeared with bottled water. No executive opened a private office. Ahead of Annie, a mother tried to complete a deposit while keeping 2 young children close. One child dropped a plastic truck. Jonathan picked it up and handed it back. "Thank you," the mother said. "You're welcome." She did not recognize him. Behind Jonathan stood an older man wearing a Vietnam veteran cap and holding a deposit envelope. "You follow the Panthers?" the man asked. "Long enough to know better." The veteran laughed. "That is the correct answer." When Annie reached the counter, a young teller named Keisha greeted her. "Good morning. How may I help you?" "I need a replacement debit card." Keisha requested identification, compared the information, and explained the replacement process. She did not become unusually warm after reading the surname. She did not look toward management. "This will take about 5 minutes," she said. "Would you like to keep the same PIN?" "Yes, please." The new card was standard dark blue. Keisha returned Annie's identification with both hands. "Is there anything else I can help you with today, Miss Carter? Whitmore?" "No, ma'am. And Annie is fine." As they walked toward the doors, Jonathan glanced back at the marble floor. "A year ago, you said money did not define dignity. It still does not. Do you miss the black card?" Annie looked at the dark blue replacement. It was never powerful. People just decided it was. Outside, the former waiting area had been transformed into a courtyard with shade trees, benches, and a water fountain. The old metal awning remained. A plaque explained that the space had once been used to separate customers and had been redesigned after unequal service practices were exposed. The bank had not erased the past. It had named it. Jonathan asked, "Do you think the place has changed?" Annie looked through the glass doors at Maria, Samuel, Leonard, and the customers waiting in the ordinary line. "Some people changed. The rules changed. The records changed. That matters. Is it enough?" "Enough is something you keep working toward." They started toward a family-owned restaurant around the corner. Jonathan had promised fried chicken, cornbread, collard greens, and peach cobbler. Claire would have ordered 2 slices of cobbler, he said. She would have claimed the second one was for later. She would have eaten it in the car. Annie laughed. The sound did not erase David, Claire, her biological mother, or the day her card landed on the marble floor. It did not need to. Healing was not the removal of memory. It was the return of life around it. Jonathan had once believed ownership gave him knowledge. He learned that authority without presence created blind spaces where cruel people built private kingdoms. Annie had once believed independence meant carrying every burden alone. She learned that strength also meant choosing which hands could be trusted. Victoria lost her career because of her choices. Richard lost his because he protected profitable silence. Maria, Samuel, Leonard, Mrs. Parker, and the other witnesses helped change the bank because each eventually refused to look away. Jonathan's wealth opened the boardroom. Annie's courage opened the truth. They walked side by side beneath the Carolina sun, neither one ahead of the other. Behind them, the glass doors closed softly, reflecting every person still standing in the ordinary line. The story reminds us that dignity should never depend on wealth, clothing, skin color, or social status. True character is revealed by how we treat people who seem powerless, especially when no one important appears to be watching. It also shows that injustice survives when good people remain silent, while real change begins when someone chooses to speak, listen, and act. Money may open doors, but courage, evidence, and compassion are what make justice possible. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.